From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We start in Venezuela, where voting centers opened on Sunday as the National Electoral Council tested the country's electoral system ahead of the May 20th election.
500 voting centers opened from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. so that election staff, inspectors, and voters could rehearse for a seamless process ahead of the big day. The operation included a total of 1,142 voting machines. Voters were lined up at polling stations across the country.
I think that everyone has to go out and vote in order to guarantee democracy, because we're facing an economic war that has us suffocated. But despite that, we have to trust that everything will come out fine.
May 20th, excellent, in peace and tranquility, and in democracy, because we have democracy. This is a process which is completely democratic.
The voting system in Venezuela is a fully automated process and can be audited throughout all of its phases. Simulation voting centers were located in 335 municipalities in each of the 24 Venezuelan states.
So tell me something. After 21 to 22 elections, you already know how to vote. Is that right?
Well, we already know how to do this with our eyes closed, but this information is always good to have because there are people, for example, older citizens, who are more likely to make mistakes.
As well as new voters who are just getting into voting. This helps them get to know the voting system so that they know how to vote, how to use the machine in order to cast their vote. It always involves informing the citizen, more than anything.
President and incumbent Nicolas Maduro himself participated in the mock vote, attending a polling center in Caracas. His visit to the polling center ended with an invitation for all to support the upcoming election. The day marked the 2-week countdown for what Venezuela's CNE expects to be a successful and smooth election day come May 20th.
And after participating in the mock election, President Maduro explained how the system works. Maduro stressed that the Venezuelan electoral system has a fingerprint verification that makes it unique. He also said it is the most audited system in the world. His visit to the voting center ended with an invitation for all to support the upcoming election. Following the voting walkthrough, Maduro sat down with his communications minister, Jorge Rodriguez, and other top officials.
I take my secret vote, which I'm casting, and immediately proceed to the electoral box, known as the ballot box. And I deposit my physical vote, which I had cast electronically, into this electoral box, just as in any country in the world. Venezuela has presidential elections on May 20th. I invite you to vote, and I invite the entire world to support the elections in Venezuela.
Our correspondent Ian Bruce was at the Fermín Toro voting center in Caracas and sent us this report.
Since 8 o'clock in the morning, people have been queuing up here at the Fermín Toro voting center in Caracas. In total, there are 500 voting centers open for this dress rehearsal today across Venezuela. That's 1,200 voting stations, because each voting center has 2 or 3 mesas, as they call them in Spanish. Now, the purpose of this dress rehearsal is both to show that the voting process itself is trustworthy and robust, and also to teach people to familiarize people with the voting process. They're given a sheet like this. But of course, after more than 20 elections during the Bolivarian Revolution, many people really don't need to be taught how to vote. Let's go inside and see how it works. The voters queue up here, and as they come in, they move first to this table here, where they present their identity card to check that they are registered to vote at this voting center. That also checks that they haven't voted, that nobody has voted with that identity card before. Then they put their fingers, a thumb, onto the machine, which takes their thumbprint, and that is checked against the database as well. So that's checked against the identity card to make sure it's the same person, and also that the thumbprint hasn't been registered as voting already. Then they go to the voting station, which we can't see the actual voting machine itself. For security reasons, we're not allowed to do that. But it's a touch screen. There's a list of the candidates which they choose from. It comes up on the screen saying, do you want to confirm that vote or not? They press that, and then once they've confirmed their vote, it prints out a paper register of their vote, and then they move on to the next machine. Now, this has been described by Jimmy Carter in 2012. The authorities here are fond of reminding us of this. It was described as, of the 92 elections that the Carter Center had monitored, Jimmy Carter said the Venezuelan process was the most reliable. This paper ballot is then like a double check, which is then later audited to make sure it tallies with the electronic voting record. And finally, they come over to this table and they put their thumbprint there, and they get indelible ink on their finger to show that they voted. Another safeguard. So all in all, this is the way the process works in Venezuela. They're just finishing there. This is the way the process works in Venezuela, and it really does seem to be a pretty robust election system, which is almost completely fraud-free and in basically fraud-proof.
That's a great report from Ian Bruce from Caracas. Earlier, we also spoke with Jean-Pierre Anaya, an economist and professor at the Bolivarian University of Venezuela, about the election process and how it compares to other countries.
I have been in another, especially in European countries and another Latin American countries. Yeah, first of all, we have a completely automated counting system, but it doesn't mean it's not checked up by humans. The system is electronically sent to the Electoral Council, where they give the total number at the end of the day. But in every poll, in every station, all the numbers are counted again, because the machine that we use have the electronic vote that you push a button, and this is the electronic voting machine, and then that prints a paper. At the end of the election, the member of the election center, they count again, and they check that the number the computer is giving, it's accurate. So all the parties that have sent members to the electoral centers, they can check the sum that the Electoral Council is giving at the end of the night.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas arrived to Venezuela on Sunday evening to start his Latin American tour. The Palestinian leader will also visit Chile and Cuba to meet politicians and members of the Palestinian communities settled in these countries. A meeting between Abbas and Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro could take place this Monday. The Palestinian president's visit is aimed to consolidate cooperation and solidarity ties with Latin America now that the U.S. is pressuring nations in the region to support its position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In Colombia, talks between the government and the National Liberation Army, the ELN, are due to begin in Havana, Cuba this week. The announcement comes after a meeting in Venezuela to discuss the next move, because talks had been taking place in Quito, but Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno eventually pulled out, citing tensions on the border with Colombia. The talks between the ELN and the government will focus on a new ceasefire agreement. The International Red Cross will be in charge of traveling with the ELN delegation from Venezuela to Cuba this Monday. The armed group delegation went to Venezuela after the Ecuadorian government decided to stop being the host and guarantor of the peace process between both sides. This is the fifth cycle of the dialogue. Colombian Senator Iván Cepeda said the conditions of these talks could be the same as the one established for the FARC. Meanwhile, violence between the ELN and the Popular Liberation Army, the ELP, continues in the Colombian northeast region of Catatumbo. 2 people were killed over the weekend, one of them a former FARC militant. Over 150,000 people have been affected by the conflict between the 2 armed groups, located in this region of the country that borders with Venezuela. former Uruguayan president José Pepe Mujica wrote a letter to the leader of the Alternative Revolutionary Force of the Common, the FARC, Jesus Santrich, who is still in jail and on hunger strike since April 9th. In the letter delivered to the delegation of the FARC, Mujica tells Santrich, "Not all is won, but not all is lost. The fight for peace is still alive and continues. In reality, it is for a new Colombia. I ask you to have faith in life and in those who will fight for the oppressed." Now we go to Russia, where Vladimir Putin was sworn in as president for a fourth term. He will remain in office for 6 more years after being re-elected in March. Putin took oath in front of some 5,000 guests who attended the ceremony at the Kremlin Hall. The president pledged to harness the country's talents to achieve breakthroughs and vowed he will improve people's living standards by boosting the economy. He also said Russia will cooperate with other states in the interest of peace and stability.
We must use all the opportunities available, first of all, to reach the most essential development goals for the economic, technology breakthrough, for raising competitive ability in those spheres which determine the future, a new quality of life, a well-being, security and health of a person are the most important. These are the issues at the center of our policy. We stand for an equal and mutually beneficial cooperation with all states in the interest of peace and stability on our planet. Russia is a strong, active and influential participant in the international life.
Let's go to a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Nicaragua, members of the Truth Commission have been sworn in by the country's National Assembly. The members will investigate the deaths left during the protests that took over the country in the past weeks. The commission is formed by 5 members who have a 3-month deadline to submit a report on the investigation. Demonstrations sparked on April 18 to protest a reform to the social security system proposed by the government of Daniel Ortega. The government later withdrew the proposal and called for a dialogue with the private sector in an attempt to return to peace. But despite the peace efforts, violence continues in the country. According to local news outlet Canal 4, right-wing groups threw stones and mortars at families in the cities of Niquinoomo and Catarina last night. The families were praying during a vigil for peace when they were attacked by these groups. In Honduras, opposition groups are protesting once again against the government of Juan Orlando Hernández. Our correspondent Gilda Silvestrucci has more from Tegucigalpa.
The protests against the government of Juan Orlando Hernández, organized by the Opposition Alliance, have resumed since May 1st. The Opposition Alliance coordinator, José Manuel Zelaya Rosales, said that this week there will be more protests and that this time they will be led by students, who will march outside the National Congress to demonstrate against the high rates of poverty and unemployment that are hitting the country. They will also demonstrate against forced immigration and violence that is mainly affecting Honduras youth. For the next couple of weeks, the Opposition Alliance is also organizing more protests to reject last year's electoral process, described as fraudulent.
That was Gilda Silvestrucci from Tegucigalpa. Criticism has sparked against Chile's government after 3 Mapuche leaders were sentenced to prison under the new anti-terrorism law. Human rights organizations have called the state to stop criminalizing indigenous Mapuche people. The head of the Americas for Amnesty International criticized the judicial process and urged the authorities to investigate alleged irregularities in the trial in which the 3 Mapuche have been convicted as terrorists. Machi Francisca Linconao and other 7 Mapuche were acquitted. Brazil's jailed former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has been detained for a month now and at the federal police headquarters in Curitiba on corruption charges. On April 7th, he was taken from the Steelworkers Union building in Sao Paulo after a judge ordered his arrest. Previously, he was denied a petition of habeas corpus from the day of Lula's arrest. Thousands of supporters have been camping outside the Curitiba police headquarters to demand his release. The people of El San Salvador Atenco in Mexico are asking for justice. For 12 years, they fought against the government's construction of an airport. Eduardo Martinez reports.
The people of San Salvador Anteco have always been defenders of the earth. They live on the shores of Lake Texcoco, where now the government is building a new international airport for Mexico City.
We are not wrong. We love our fields, we love our way of life, our traditions, our customs, but we are facing corrupt institutions.
Since 2001, when the concept of the mega project was raised for the first time, residents of this area rejected the idea of their land being turned into a terminal, roads and shopping malls.
They are rubbing their hands with excitement with all the money they're going to make. These people have already made lots of money through infrastructure built with our taxes.
12 years ago, while they were preparing to protest against the presidential decree that evicted them from their land, the state and federal governments ordered the army to suppress them.
The cause for which our grandparents fought was for a life of respect, of freedom. Today the same situation is being repeated, in another time and different circumstances. But the enemy continues to be the enemy of the people, those who have money and rule the institutions.
2 young people died after security personnel violently suppressed the protest. Hundreds of people were detained and dozens of women were victims of sexual violence. They eventually had to take their cases to international courts.
Nothing has changed in the 12 years since that day. Still no justice. They should punish not only the main perpetrators, but everyone else responsible as well.
With President Enrique Peña Nieto's rise to power, work on the airport was restarted in an even bigger way, and the government is vehemently defending now contracts worth more than $13 billion.
In Barbados, the nomination of the political candidates has started ahead of the general elections, which are due on May 2nd. Around 125 candidates from various political parties are expected to register on Monday for the upcoming election. This is a significant increase in number, as there were only 67 candidates in the 2013 elections. The 2 major parties, the Barbados Labour Party and the Democratic Labour Party, are expected to field 30 candidates each. The ruling party of Barbados, the Democratic Labour Party, has launched its election campaign on Sunday, a day after the opposition Barbados Labour Party's campaign began. Prime Minister Fruendel Stewart said, while addressing the supporters, that the opposition candidate Mia Mottley is unfit to be Prime Minister.
Are we going to allow the values that derive from hard work, trying and failing, but never failing to try, discipline, strength of character, integrity, Are we going to allow those values to go by the wayside and replace them with something called bloodline, where all that matters is who your family, who your father is and who your mother is, who your grandparents are, who your cousins are? Barbados has passed that stage too long. And we are not going back there. The Democratic Labour Party came into existence to fight that, and we have fought it successfully.
Today marks the 99th anniversary of the birthday of Argentinian icon and social leader Eva Perón, also known as Evita. Evita, who married former Argentinian President Juan Domingo Perón, became a symbol of revolution and social justice due to her work with the poor and the oppressed. She was also the main promoter of women's suffrage. On Twitter, Bolivian President Evo Morales highlighted her strength while fighting against oligarchies, capitalism, and imperialism. The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, said she gained Argentinians' hearts for defending the country's exploited ones. Eva Perón died very young, at only 33 years old, from cervical cancer. And Brazil is getting ready for the World Cup. Soccer fans built a mosaic of the Brazilian flag and the World Cup trophy to send a message of support to the national team ahead of the 2018 World Cup in Russia. A group of 176 supporters descended from a 28 meters high bridge, each holding a cardboard section of Brazil's flag. This was also an attempt to set a record for the world's biggest mosaic.
On the eve of the World Cup, making a mosaic like this is unheard of. I hope this will be an incentive for our players, because the Brazilian team has not won a title for a long time. May this serve as an incentive for them to bring the trophy back to our country.
And Mexico has revived its pre-Columbian Mesoamerican ball game. The national championship for the Mesoamerican ball game was celebrated this weekend close to the Teotihuacan archaeological site outside of Mexico City. Teams came from all over the country and from abroad to play the sport that dates back to 1400 BC. Teams have to keep a rubber ball in play by knocking it from the hips towards the other team. The opposing team wins a point if the ball is not kept in play. Let's take another short break, but join us after another look at what our multimedia team has to report.